Duane Elgin is an author, speaker, educator, consultant, and media activist. He pioneered the voluntary simplicity movement with his classic first book that I mentioned earlier, published in 1981, Voluntary Simplicity. He has a new book, The Living Universe. And in this book, Duane marshals evidence from cosmology, biology, physics, and even his participation in NASA-sponsored psychic experiments to show that the universe is actually a living field of existence and that we are always in communion with that aliveness, whether we are conscious of it or not. We have a fascinating discussion coming up. Please welcome Duane Elgin.
Actually, thank you so much for having me here. I'm looking out and I'm seeing friends of many years. It's just a delight to be here. Thank you. The question I asked earlier, we're going to address in a few minutes. It's going to be a central question we're going to explore. The topic I want to talk with you about tonight is what I would call beacons of hope. Beacons of hope. And for more than 40 years now, I've been working professionally looking at the future, looking not only at the future of this country, but also the entire Earth. My first job out of college was working on a presidential commission for 2 years, looking at the American future. And I got an education not only about the future, but about White House politics and how the White House actually runs. And after that, I went off to California. I worked for 6 years at the Stanford Research Institute. I did research for the President's Science Advisor, looking at critical global problems. At the end of a year, they said, these are critical global problems, but they're too politically potent to be put out there in the public domain, and we're going to just have to put this on the shelf. So again and again, over the years, what I saw was that one of the deep taboos was looking at transformational change in the future. You could look at a modicum of change, but not deep fundamental change for the future. But here we are facing powerful trends that are pushing us into a new world. And so what I want to talk about tonight are the beacons of hope that are drawing us into a more promising future. Because as I go around the world, the one thing that I see again and again, in an instant, people can tell me how this is going wrong, how it's going bad, how we're going to have a future of calamity and catastrophe. It does not take long, but to ask people, well, tell me a future where we as a human family transform this journey into something promising and positive, that is a much harder job. And it's that harder job that I want to take on tonight. Because if we don't have the tools for describing that more promising future, what we're left with is what we've got right now, which is our fears for the kind of future that seems to be unfolding around us. So there's possibility, there's opportunity, and then there's adversity. And I want to begin, though, with adversity. And then we're going to engage in a collective conversation. But to start that conversation, I want to begin by telling you, based upon my more than 40 years of work, where I see the world. And here's what I see, and I've been giving talks all around the world, and I see people that understand there is a problem, say, with climate change. Other people say, yes, I understand that we're running out of cheap oil, and we do have an energy problem. Other people understand, yes, we do have a problem with species extinction. Between a quarter and a half of all species are threatened with extinction, both plant and animal, and so on. But what I do not see is a systemic understanding of how these trends come together to create a condition of systemic global crisis. Now, my sense is, and I've been saying this professionally since 1978, that in the 2020s, we are going to hit an evolutionary wall as a species. And when I say we're going to hit an evolutionary wall, it's not an ecological wall, it's an evolutionary wall. It means we run into ourselves. And we run into our own understanding of what it means to be human and where we're going from here. So I am anticipating a time of profound systemic crisis emerging in the 2020s, and I've been saying that since 1978. And if you look at the driving trends around that, just consider a few of them. When I was born, there were about 2.2 billion people on this earth. There are now almost 7 billion. It means population has roughly tripled in my lifetime. And if I can be fortunate enough to live a while longer, it will quadruple in my lifetime. Quadruple in my lifetime. 95% of that population growth is going into third world countries, into urban settings of great poverty. Now, I think when we look at the crisis confronting us, it is not so much going to be one of climate or energy. It's going to be more fundamentally, I think, one of food. I think we're going to run out of food before we run out of oil and water and such. We're going to run out of food. Last year, there were food riots in 33 countries. 33 countries had food riots. Now, if you think about, we have 7 billion people on the planet now. We're going to add another billion or two in the next 10 to 20 years. And right now, the energy required to prop up a high-intensity agriculture is being compromised because within a couple of years, we're going to run into peak energy, and the demand for energy is going to exceed the supply, and the cost of energy for people in poor countries is just going to be prohibitive. And that energy has propped up a high-intensity agriculture and food production because that energy is not just for tractors and trucks, it's for herbicides and pesticides that are made out of petroleum-based products. So there's energy. Well, we can look at other factors. We can look at species extinction. Like I said, between a quarter and a half of all species are threatened with extinction. And it's taken me a long time to really appreciate this. I was recently at a conference with Sylvia Earle, a woman whose business card reads from the National Geographic, Explorer in Residence. And Sylvia Earle is in her 60s. She's introduced often as not as Her Highness, but as Her Deepness, because she has been deeper in the oceans than any woman in the world. Now, Sylvia Earle said to this assembled group of international women leaders, she said, I want you to remember one thing. No blue, no green. No blue, no green. People say, I don't. She said, this is a water planet. It's a blue planet. The water is dying. If the earth and the water on the planet dies, the green is going to go. You're giving too much attention to the green. You're not paying attention to the blue. No blue, no green. I scratched my head. And so I've been doing research. She said 95% of the fish at the top level, the swordfish, the big fish, the tuna fish, and so on, she said 95% of those fish have been fished out. They're gone. And I just read a report 2 days ago from the United Nations that said 40% of the phytoplankton at the very bottom of the food chain are gone. So we've taken out 95% at the top, we've taken out 40% at the bottom, and we're taking out the middle very rapidly, and that gives you an indication of what we're doing to the food chain for the entire Earth. So we could keep going down this list from climate change, species extinction, resource depletion, water, for example. It's estimated by the 2020s, 40% of the people on this planet won't have access to enough water to be self-sufficient in growing their own food. And that's understandable if they're in these huge urban regions. So my point is, we are moving into a condition not of one problem, but a systemic crisis. And when that systemic crisis finally comes together, it will be unyielding. And we're going to have not only the fiscal crisis that we've had in the past, but I suspect we're going to have, obviously, political crises, civic crises. We're going to see the breakdown of civic society in many respects. We're going to see the breakdown of cultural and social norms. We're going to see the breakdown of spirituality as it's traditionally practiced. So that's my estimation. We are in for a time of profound transition as a human family. And I think many of us recognize this, but we're reluctant to let it in because it is so profoundly fundamental. So we don't let it in, and we don't talk about it, and we don't look at it, and as a consequence, it just kind of sits there as a fear in the background, and what I want to do is bring it out. And I want to say we are going somewhere as a human family. Do you realize that 72,000 years ago, there was this enormous explosion of a volcano in Indonesia, the Mount Toba catastrophe, it's been called. And it's estimated at that time, nearly all the humans on the planet went extinct, and essentially there was a small cluster of humans in the deep southeastern part of Africa that survived 72,000 years ago. And it's estimated genetically that the survivors were only a few hundred people, maybe a few thousand. And it's those few hundred people, that tribe, that colony, that cluster in southern Africa that then traveled north, traveled around the world, and populated the entire planet. There is more genetic diversity in a small tribe of chimpanzees than there is in the entirety of the human family. We are all cousins. We all came from this one tribe 72,000 years ago. We're all from the same family, essentially. Now we're coming back together 72,000 years later, and it's not a few hundred, it's 7 billion of us. We have succeeded extraordinarily. What's going on here? What is this journey about? Okay, so then that brings us to these questions, and there are actually 4 I would like to explore if we have time. But the first one has to do with the maturation of the human family. So let's take a vote on this. You've had a chance to consider this, to look at the life stage of the human family. And given that on any particular day we can go up and down that spectrum probably many times a day. But let's take a social average and say, given the social average, where is the life stage of the human family? What do we think here? So let's take a vote. How many would vote that we're roughly in our toddler stage as a human family? How many would vote that? 1, 2, 3, 4. Just a handful. Okay, how many would vote that we're in our teenage stage? Overwhelming, I would say 3/4 probably. How many would vote that we're in our adult stage? Courage, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, good. And elder, how many would vote we're in our elder? Elder, yes. Okay. Now this is so interesting. Remember I said Campbell, one of the most learned persons on this planet, said, how should I know where we are on the journey? Well, here's the thing. I have asked this question all over the planet. For example, I was in India in 1999. And I was giving a talk to about 400 young women that were just graduating as school teachers to go off and teach all over India. And I decided I'd ask them this question. I didn't know if they would understand the question. They had no problem. They were ready to answer right there on the spot. They kind of laughed, and I give them a minute, but they voted just as we did here, overwhelmingly that we're in our adolescence, our teenage years as a human family. So I've asked it in Russia, same response. In Japan, spiritual leaders in Japan, same response. Business leaders in Brazil, same response. Canada, Europe, the United States, same response. Intuitively, we know what's going on. And when Joseph Campbell said, how should I know? The fact is, we do know what's going on. And we do know roughly that we're behaving like adolescents. Now, there's good news and bad news here. I mean, we kind of looked at the downside, but actually there's a real upside here. Adolescence has a huge amount of energy. I have 3 sons. They have a huge amount of energy. They have a huge amount of enthusiasm, a huge amount of idealism, and that's exactly what we need right now as a human family if we're going to make it through this time of profound transition. Now, there's a second question here that goes with the first one, and the second question is probably one of the most important I could ask you ever. First one is really important, but the second one is just profoundly important. And it's this. If we assume that we're roughly in our adolescence as a human family, what is it going to take to get us into our adulthood? This is not an engineering issue. This isn't economics. This is something deeper. This is psychological. This is soulful. What is it going to take to get us from our adolescence to our adulthood? And to answer that, I would ask you, what was it in your personal life that was most important in enabling you to move from your adolescence and into your adulthood? And here's the basic premise. What was most important for you is probably going to be the most important thing for the whole human family. So what you learned in your own life has great value, I maintain, for understanding the transformation we need to go through as a human family. So let's take 5 minutes or so and talk about this. And we have 2 mics. We can run around the room. And after, let's say, 5 minutes or so, I want to hear from people what was important to them in their transition from adolescence to adulthood. And in having the conversation, why don't you break up into, say, groups of 3 or so, small groups, so you can actually have a meaningful conversation. So please go ahead.
Coming.
It'd be good to kind of mix it up. Why'd you do it with Duane?
Well, all right.
Well, I'm clear we're adolescent, and I'm clear that one of the big changes that is required is compassion, soul, and devotion.
How about, the question is, in your life,
That's what it was.
it was, so like, what was it? Like,
Passion, soul, and devotion.
was there a juicy, where you were just, where you learned that?
Where did I learn that?
Yeah, where it really,
When I began to realize that you were the same as me. Huge compassion. Recognition of self. And the turning from me to devotion. It'll come to me from somewhere, but I've got to give it up. To me, that's where we're going. I'm certainly a part of that.
yeah. Great.
Look at it. I mean, look what's happened in the last 25 years just along those lines. Huge.
It is, and there are some cross-cutting trends here that we're going to discuss.
There's things we can't discuss. We can't discuss Akasha. That's not something that's okay in this room. But as that Akasha enriches, everything comes up and is beautiful. And as the Akasha falls away, everything gets hard. And we've been enriching now the Akasha for 40, 50 years. Maybe longer than that. Certainly. Huge energy has gone into enriching the Akasha.
Indeed. I'd agree with that.
So that's the thing, that's the unmentionable that we don't have the ability to say here. That it's this other thing that we are that's growing on its own and hauling us with it. And we take credit for doing it, but it's hauling us with it. Very ego to think we're doing it. How we doing, Chief? So I'll go back. Compassion, soul, and devotion.
I wish we had more time. I would ask you a more personal questions about vulnerable questions about those qualities and when and how they emerge in your life. Because in the personal pain and...
You don't get it until age 33. It's impossible.
But in that...
before.
In other words, if you're going to move a young person, and you say, well, soul, compassion.
No, you just put out the akasha.
No. But if you put out your pain, your soulful journey, you tell them, here's what.
Shakti.
Yeah.
Put out the Shakti and they change.
Yeah.
And all they got to do is change 10% sooner than they did the generation before.
Yeah.
We're on our way. I'm close. I'm close to it. And this. And one of
I'm going to have to. I'm not a good conversation partner here because I have to attend to this.
Did you work? Oh yeah, that's all right. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're no problem. No, stay right there. I should actually.
You should what?
I should be doing.
With the business thing.
All right. I would like to hear from some people about what was pivotal in your life, in your transition from your adolescence to adulthood. Please. Wait, here comes the microphone. Yeah. Please stand up.
Okay, my name is Gorby, or Ron, either way. I think my change came when I started having a bunch of kids. First of all, you can't take them back home because you've already went out the door. So you better work. And I told my kids, if I work, you work. Okay, I help you, you help me. And every one of my kids has a college education. So anyhow, I think it's a two-way street. From beginning with a wife, she either loves you or she doesn't. And if she does, keep her.
All right. So let's build on this. You have a bunch of kids, and boy, that sets things in motion. They move from adolescence to adulthood. What's happening to the human family? Hey, we're having a bunch of kids, something like 7 billion of them. You know, like, okay, maybe it's time for us to step up like you did and say, okay, this is a two-way street here. It's not a cushy ride. We're going to have to work on this together. Is that the kind of? So, in other words, there's a deep insight there you just shared for what we need to be doing, not to have a marketplace, but have a family place. Yeah, please.
Yeah, good. I'll try and go quickly so lots of people can share. What I saw is models and maps. So people, how to get from adolescence to adult are there models of people who are being adults or making it work that I can model myself after or want to be? And then what is the map to get there? Being a baby boomer, a lot of what the 60s rebellion was, well, we didn't like the maps. I didn't want to be my parents. I didn't want to be the, who was in front of me to be. So there was like a big, lots of rebellion against that thing. But as far as the pathway, it was like the ability to see, what I wanted to copy or what I didn't want to copy. And then regarding us as a whole, I don't know, what is the model? Where do we point to a society or a country or a village or where it's how we want to be? I don't know that we have that model. So that's
great insight. See, so let's take that. Role models, first of all. At the individual level, where are the role models of a mature species? Our role models, where do we get our role models? They're sports stars. They're movie stars. We have the Dalai Lama. Who do we have? I mean, really, this is very, very serious. If we need role models to invite us into a more promising future, where are they? Then you said models, stories. What's the story? We don't have one. We're between stories. We got stories as ethnic groups, as gender groups, as racial groups, as national groups, and so on. But the story of the whole human family, we don't have it yet. But my guess is, within this generation, we will have a story. We're going to start telling ourselves, we never had a chance. We never could have succeeded. We just blew it. Well, we always knew that we would. Or we're going to say, we're really an inventive species, and golly, we're going to pull this together, and we're going to transform this earth into this promising place of prosperity. So we don't have a story now. So what you brought up, role models and stories, are really fundamental to what we're lacking as a human family. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Am I on? Okay. I started out in the early 60s with a dream, and that was to be the first woman city manager. And what was happening in the time, which I did not recognize then until many years later, was there was a change occurring in the whole public. But the key for me, building on what Brooke was saying, is that the mentors I had didn't say why. They said, why not? There were no civil rights in those days. But they said, why not? If you want to be a city manager, go do it. This is what you need to do. And I had that support. But looking back, because I wasn't looking at it at that time, you look at all of the changes that were occurring in society with Martin Luther King and President Kennedy and everything that was happening. They created the atmosphere that allowed the question of why. That's what we need now. Why do we not have people out there protesting what's going on? I mean, I just don't feel that same aura occurring that needs to be there.
Great, thank you. Please.
I think it takes courage. I think it takes courage to leave behind the known, what is known, and to face the unknown. And most adolescents have to do that at some point to be healthy.
Golly, these comments, I'm just trying to see how they speak to us as a human family, our courage as a species to stand up and to have the courage to overcome all the history, thousands of years of all kinds of conflict, for example, to have the courage of compassion, if you will, to step above the conflicts of the past and see a more promising future. That's really going to demand our maturity. So we could continue with this. I want to move on to another topic. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Sorry, you know, the other challenge is how to be creative enough. And I'm thinking, well, what if neither Jesus nor the aliens are coming? It's actually, it's going to be us.
It's just,
you know?
us.
Ask a question
Yes.
before you move on.
Okay, yeah, please.
How can there be a collective story when our circumstances in the world are so different? You know, we in this world have one story and we can have one dream, but somebody at a different level, say in Iraq or any country that's been experiencing war, they're speaking of survival. The story, how can the story be the same? How
Right.
can the dream be the same?
See, that is the exact question that we are exploring right now. Because people around the world are saying, I'm different from you, you're different from me, my past, my future, we're all different, and we don't have anything that really brings us together. So my question is there? Maybe there isn't. But my suspicion is one story, and we're exploring this right now, is a story that the human family is just growing up. And we started off as toddlers, and we kind of been growing up over the last 30, 40,000 years. And we've now gone through an agrarian period and an industrial period, now into the communications era. And as we reach a planetary scale of civilization, we're being asked to move into a new stage of maturity, a new stage of consciousness, and to really respect it, it's a whole system now. So the question, a new story could be, well, hey, we're just growing up. All around the world. I mean, that's a story that everyone already recognizes. So people could say, okay, we have all of these conflicts, that's true. But one thing that we share in common is that we recognize that we are a maturing species on a journey of maturation, and we're roughly in our adolescence, and we need to do various things that we commonly recognize adolescents do to move into their adulthood. That's all I'm saying, is at that visceral level. Not a lot of headiness here. This is what it's like to be an adolescent moving in that rite of passage, that fire of initiation into your adulthood. Okay. We'd take longer. It's a juicy question. But think about in your own life, keep this alive. What was important for you in your own life as you moved into your adulthood, and how does that inform what you might be doing now that would be powerful for the whole world? Okay, let's move to a second, what I would call beacon of hope, another story of human possibility. This one comes from Joseph Campbell as well. And he wrote a book called The Hero's Journey. And the hero's journey is a very complex one. It has many aspects to it, but in its most simplified form, it has 3 stages. First of all, the hero leaves home, leaves the security, leaves the safety, leaves the familiarity of home, and goes on a journey of discovery and adventure. There are many tests along the way on this journey of separation, but finally there is a supreme test, a test so huge that our hero has to transform him or herself if he or she is actually going to move ahead on the journey. And with that transformation, then there is the 3rd stage from initiation then into return, taking the knowledge of that transformation back to the world, back to the community, and so on. So the hero's journey then has these 3 stages: separation, initiation, return. And the question is, if we as a human family, roughly 35,000 years ago, according to the archaeological record, about 35,000 years ago, woke up and we started our journey, our heroic journey, pulling back from nature, saying, no, we're different, we're separate, We're individuals, and we began this process of individuation, differentiation 35,000 years ago, and here we are now. The question is, where are we on the journey? Are we still at a place of separation? Are we at a place of initiation? Or have we moved then to a place of return? That's the next question for conversation. Let's take 5-10 minutes, and we'll explore that. Please go ahead.
Problem. I have a big problem when
I'm going to dig
bigger.
in this
Go
time.
ahead.
The adolescent brain does not develop fully into adulthood until mid-20s. So we have an undeveloped brain.
Social brain.
No, the neocortex is not.
Social brain.
The neocortex is large enough. We don't reason enough.
As a species or as a species?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what do we do?
Oh, I have another finish with that.
Oh, okay.
Total another aspect I want.
I don't have answers. I just have the question.
I'm
Just asking the question.
I just asked the question.
We come with a total package. The task is to go deep enough inward and understand ourselves and then understand love in its complete context to get to agape, to accept the rest of the world.
Great.
She has the answer.
Great. Well, yeah, I'm still asking the question.
I'm not into heroes as such.
No, it's the heroes.
Yes.
No,
I'm not into heroes.
well-
I think everyone is a hero.
Oh, everyone is.
Because they have.
I agree with that.
They have the inner core. You
I agree
come
with
as a
that.
whole package.
I agree with
But
that.
how does the brain develop?
I agree with that.
No.
We're all heroes. And that's part of what that's why we're having this conversation. It's not that I'm the hero.
Okay.
It's that
All right.
we are. It's
wait.
us.
I'll wait.
So I want
Don't
to
wait.
something new at it.
You
It's not something new, it's something older than time. But I have a different belief. So when the Big Bang happened,
Well, you know
This
that.
form.
No, wait, no. There's still, but there's the brain theory.
right? There's so many different.
Okay, there's
but source.
Okay, source.
Was at its pure energy, very powerful. It started, and then all of a sudden, it started going outwards, and creating the planets, created our planet.
Right.
So what happens is, it's still to this day, scientific fact, it's still evolving.
Right.
It's still moving away from its source. So when we, the humankind, started here evolving, we evolved and we had connection to the source.
Right.
To that energy source, we were awake to it. Hence, we built the pyramids. People don't even understand things like Petra. Never can be explained how that was created. There's people, archaeologists working on it day and night, but we cannot explain how Petra was created. All over the world, there's same stories. The brain was so close to the source. But as we're moving out, just like the universe, it's getting kind of watered down. We're losing that connection to the creativity, to mastery, and so my thing is we are devolving, not evolving into, we were closer to the source. If we could return to that source within meditation, within connections with go inward with nature, so we don't destroy the planet. If we are spending time in source energy, not in computer energy or TV energy or, whatever energy, but just to go back to the source and actually start awakening the part of our brain that has fallen asleep. It's not asleep, getting ready to awaken. It was awake. And we have watered it down because we were how many thousands of people on the planet at that time? And like you said, we're 7 billion now. We're moving away from the source.
Mary, we disconnect. We disconnect.
So that's a
and
new.
You gotta connect the head, the heart, and the soul.
I have a book for you to consider. It's called The Living Universe, and the idea is the source is never gone. It's everywhere.
Yes, we have to reconnect to it.
Oh, we have to, yes, I agree with that. So then that was return.
To the source.
So then that's our return. Our return. And it's everywhere. Yes. So, but, yes, so then the question is, separation from source, initiation, where you say, I better get back to source, and then in source and return. So that's the question, where are we? Are we still in separation? Are we in initiation? Or are we in return? I'm asking you to, as a citizen of this earth, you have a responsibility to the entire earth system, to the life on this earth. And I'm not asking you to judge. I'm asking you to take responsibility for being a citizen of this earth and saying, how are we doing here? Okay, so I'm not. Okay, all right. I've been over the top of the barricade for decades.
I had 38 years.
About 20? Okay. All right. I'd like to take another vote. Looking at the 3 stages of the hero's journey or the heroine's journey. Looking at the human family not as villains, but as on a heroic journey. Starting off 35,000 or more years ago, separation. Where are we now? So it's 3 stages. Separation, profound initiation, a supreme test, or return. 3 stages. So, return to source, let's say, just simply. Return to where we started from, the living universe, if you will. Return to the source of it all. Okay, how many would vote that we're still in a stage of separation? I'd say, what do you think, about half, a third? What? About half? This side of the room. Okay. How many would vote that we have reached a stage of initiation? Substantial. Yeah, I'd leave a little more than half, I'd say. And this final stage of return. Okay, handful there. So once again, the views of this community that we have actually entered into a stage of initiation comes up around the world. People recognize this. They say, the politicians may not be talking about it, the business leaders may not be acting on it, but we are already there. It's already happening. A majority of people will say, in my family, in my life, this is happening. We're dealing with this. So there's another story. It's to say that we're not villains just destroying the earth. We're heroes on a heroic journey of awakening. We're pulling back. We're becoming more and more empowered, differentiated, integrated, understanding. And then with that, we can return to where we came from, but with a new level of knowledge, a new level of competency and power, a new level of compassion. So a second story. Not only are we growing up, we're on a journey of a heroic journey of transformation, going through a supreme test and moving in that supreme test into our early adulthood as a human family. Okay, let's take a third theme, and I'm not sure. Let's take the theme that we're biocosmic beings. Biocosmic beings. Biocosmic. Now, a premise of the last few hundred years is that basically we live in a place that's mostly inert matter and empty space. And essentially, all the life that's around us in these biological entities, our bodies and such. So most of what we have is essentially dead matter, empty space, and there are these few islands of life like ourselves. And then in that kind of setting, it really makes sense to exploit that which is dead, all this other stuff, on behalf of that which is living me, so that I really can surpass myself and evolve. Now, a new view of the universe is beginning to emerge. And this view of the universe, if we had the time, I've been exploring this for decades, this view of the universe is one that's increasingly understood by the public at large. And so let's start there. In 1962, 22% of the American adult population said they had had a mystical experience. 22% said they had had a mystical experience. Typically, that was an experience of feeling that the universe was alive, that the universe at its foundation had love at its foundations, a feeling of great peace, a great satisfaction, a great contentment, that I belonged here in this universe. 22% had had that kind of experience. And that was in 1962. Now, we fast forward year by year, that's been increasing. And that survey has just been done once again, and instead of 22% of the adult population in the U.S., it's now 49%. We have had a revolution, not in thinking, but in direct experience. This is where people directly experience the universe as being alive, and they are participating in that aliveness. 48% they hadn't had that experience. And so if you want to go statistically, I know it's insignificant, but we have made a crucial transformation and tipping as a culture in terms of just direct experience. And that direct experience says, you know, the universe isn't inert matter and empty space. There is a living field. There is a living presence here. Now, if we had the time, we would explore this through the lens of science and spirituality, because both are beginning to say the same thing. And the tools of science are becoming so powerful, this is so fascinating, that they are undoing the assumptions of science that says it's inert matter and empty space. So science is transforming itself. Spirituality, if we look across the world's spiritual traditions and ask how do they regard the universe, not compassion and love and so on, because that is fairly well understood. How do the world's wisdom traditions regard the universe in which we live? Is it something to kind of disregard because it's really about us? Or is it something to really pay attention to because we belong to it, are part of it? And what we find again and again across all of the world's wisdom traditions is that we are profoundly a part of a living universe. And it's when our aliveness meets the aliveness of the universe out there, and those two alivenesses come together, then we have that mystical experience. We say, yeah, I belong here. I'm a part of a larger whole, of course. Okay. So that brings us then into the biocosmic dimensions of who we are. Because for the last few hundred years, we've said, well, look, I'm just a biological being. And if you think it's anything more than that, it's just fantasy. Now, what is being discovered in the laboratory, and which is so juicy and interesting if we had the time to explore it, but it is that there is an ecology of consciousness. And I had the opportunity firsthand for 3 years at the Stanford Research Institute, one of the largest think tanks in the world, to explore with some of the finest technologies in the world, that ecology of consciousness. And what I would say is that everyone has the same connection. We are all wired into a living universe because that is the way it's been created. It's a living system, and we're a part of that aliveness. And we're just beginning to really discover that. So rather than lay a bunch of scientific facts on you and such. What I would rather like to invite you to do right now, because we have just a short amount of time, is to, in your table, talk about your experience as a part of a living universe, the extent to which you've had a mystical experience where you have felt at home, at peace, a part of this larger aliveness. Is that true for you as well? Please go ahead.
Can we do this with our whole table?
Yes, in your whole table, it'd be fine.
I am part of something larger, and I need to concern myself with that something larger, which I translated to humanity in all of its aspects, including ecology and whatever else. So yeah, I think
I've had them pretty much all my life, really. I've had a lot of moments of just like a huge expansion where I'm suddenly really listening to what there might be that isn't, that is me speaking to myself, but I mean, moments of huge expansion, and they have always guided me. It's like there's I call it a spiritual quality, when you ask something with passion, what now, or whatever, and you listen, then that leads into that kind of a mystical experience. I cherish that more than anything in my life, that feeling of connection. Connection is the most important thing in the world to me. Really?
I don't know that I have. I mean, maybe it's so common I don't recognize it as that. I don't know.
That's something. That does. A lot of people feel that way. That only a saint should have that experience. It's very common.
Oh gosh, I've actually really have. But I know I'm set there's something going on. I remember when I actually didn't think that you should ever put spirit into business. I remember really thinking you should never ever blend them. They never should come together. And I was so attempting to just keep them separate. I was working so hard on it. And I was calling on a brand new client, and I talked to him on the phone 10 minutes. He never met him. And when I sat in his office, I had actually been reading books on reincarnation. And of course, I would never say that to any client I know. And I sat down, and I had all of his papers on my desk and on my lap. And we had talked on the phone 10 minutes. I knew the longings he was interested in. And I was I met him, he's a very nice man, and he was sitting behind his desk, and I started to flip through some papers to get out, the sheets that I needed for this line, and all of a sudden, I just heard him say to me, Kathy, I'm going to change the subject, and I'd like you to tell me everything you know about reincarnation. And I was mortified. Oh. Because I thought, never. I'm the one that gave I'm a Italian girl born in New York and gave up Catholicism at age 12. And I was so anti-religion. I did not think you should talk about spirituality and business. I was like, oh my God, stop showing. I mean, how the hell does he know? talking about the stupid line. It was like your heart opens, and I felt, passion, and so I just started. I said, well, I don't know a lot. I'll just tell you what I've been reading. So we started to talk, and I made a friend, and I sold it. And you know, but when I left, of course, my mind, wow, how did you know? And yada yada. And what I learned later, a very wise friend said, how could he know? Because he said it's all energy. What he's going through and what you're studying, it's all right there. That's what I started to know. There's no place to hide it. I don't know.
Golly, if we had time, I'd love to hear from the different tables, stories. I just know there'd be rich stories about living in a living universe, connecting with that field of aliveness and bringing that into your creative juices into the world. We're about out of time, though, and I want to conclude by telling you about the fourth beacon of hope that we were going to inquire into, and it goes to our scientific name as a species, and it's to say, well, who are we as a species? And often in the literature you see, well, we're Homo sapiens. Well, that's not actually who we are in the scientific literature. Scientifically, we're called Homo sapiens sapiens. And what that means, to be sapient, means that you know. To be sapient means that you know that you know. And where animals, know, we are beings that presumably know that we know. And that is our most distinctive scientific description, is that we are the species with a reflective consciousness. And when we know that we know, we can take responsibility for our actions in a way that we wouldn't otherwise, because we know and have an intuitive sense of what we're doing. So a key question for looking at the human journey is, well, how are we doing in fulfilling our species designation as Homo sapiens sapiens, the species with reflective consciousness? To what extent, as you look at us as a whole human family, are we reflecting on climate change, species extinction, resource depletion, and the rest? And to what extent are we reflecting upon sports stars, entertainment stars, and the scandal of the day? Where is our reflective attention going as a human family? And could we be mobilizing our most core capacity, that of reflective consciousness, and apply that in business, in government, in civic affairs and family affairs and all the rest, and up-level our society? I think yes, and that would be the fourth conversation that we would have. And so then I want to summarize what I see as the two possible futures coming out of those four beacons of hope, because they're not only beacons of hope, they're beacons of despair as well. Because if we choose not to grow up, not to mature as a human family, if we choose not the heroic path, but the villainous path of ruin, if we choose to distract ourselves as opposed to reflect on what we're creating as a human family, and if we choose not to see ourselves as participants in a larger living universe, but just as biological beings in a struggle for survival, I guarantee you we will have a future of ruin. And on the other hand, if we say, well, hey, we're just growing up here, cut us some slack. You know, we're adolescents. You know, of course we're going to overshoot. Of course we're going to make some mistakes. But now we see what we're doing. And for heaven's sakes, we're on this heroic journey of awakening, and we're in this supreme test. We're going through the fire of initiation as a species, and we're going to come out the other side as a more mature, more compassionate, more reflective human family. And we're going to recognize that we're not here just on this earth. We're a part of a larger cosmic family and journey. And so what I see right now is the criticality of telling ourselves a new story for the journey, a journey that we can then share widely with people around the world. As was mentioned by several people already, we don't have a story for the whole human family. So here are 4 elements that we can begin to combine in various ways and begin to tell a story that is widely recognized by people all around the earth. So, in conclusion, what I would ask is, we each have the capacity for what Thich Nhat Hanh calls near gifts and true gifts. Near gifts are things we're pretty good at. Near gifts are things, you know, we often make our living doing. True gifts are those soulful things that we just know we are profoundly gifted at bringing to the world. And maybe the world doesn't want to pay us a lot of money for that gift, but we know it is our particular gift to bring to the world. And my feeling is we are in this time of initiation, the rite of passage for the human family. And the gifts this world needs are our true gifts. I don't think our near gifts will be good enough to get us through. So what I would ask of you is to look at our conversation tonight, continue the conversation from tonight, and explore the kind of true gifts that you can bring to transforming the human journey. Thank you so much. Thank you all.